Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. Today's guest is Simon Taylor, Chief Product Officer for 11FS Foundry. Foundry is a revolutionary platform built by 11FS, which aims to become the operating system of financial services. The Foundry platform enables any business to quickly offer embedded financial products, delivering on the premise that every business is potentially a fintech. Simon also shares his insights on how the fintech industry is shaping up globally and what he thinks of the fintech scene down under. But before we chat to Simon, I've got a special opportunity to share with our marketing community. We've been re-engaged by one of our favorite clients to find a head of marketing in a newly created role. Reporting to the country manager, you'll be the person who develops the go-to-market strategy for one of the most respected fintechs in the world. If open banking gets you up in the morning, then this one is definitely for you. For more info, check out the show notes or head over to the Tier 1 People LinkedIn page. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very, very good. How have you been? It's been a while since we spoke.
It has been a short while, and I don't think I've been on your podcast before. I feel really like I've made it in life now once I'm here. But yeah, really, really good. It's been a crazy sort of 18 months as it has for everybody, but real sense of momentum at the moment, which is exciting.
Well, that's good to hear because it feels like we've got the exact opposite down under. Whilst the rest of the world was struggling, we were cruising, and now the tables have turned. But I think it was actually 12 months back that you and I last caught up, and I was a guest on the 11FS show, Fintech Insiders, and I think we were having a really good chat about the Australian scene down under, and it's just incredible to see how far it's evolved. What are you seeing in the UK?
I mean, the thing I'm seeing in the UK is how much everybody else has evolved. You know, the story for a long time was London, the fintech capital of the world, the UK, the darling of the world. It's not the case anymore. I think you just got to look at the Afterpay acquisition by Square to see that the homegrown Australian companies can really make it big on a global stage, and many more to follow that, I expect. And also, the early stage scene in Australia really, really is getting extremely exciting. And then, of course, the benefit of having seen the European GDPR regulations and open banking and maybe having a better crack at that. We'll see if it works out. But I think there's really fertile soil to do interesting things. But then I look at the rest of APAC, things coming out of Singapore, Indonesia, like that whole space is just incredibly exciting. Every week I'm bumping into something there. And Latin America. So fintech is really a global story now, and that's hugely exciting.
Fantastic. Now, I invited you on the show to talk about Foundry, which is, it was, my kind of understanding was a kind of banking as a service offering. So would you like to share with our listeners a bit more about Foundry and what it is?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you started with banking as a service. I don't think Foundry is a banking as a service, and that term gets thrown around, and we wrote a report on the subject for that exact reason. People confuse about three different things. The first thing is banking software that is sold as a service. So in that category, I would put Mambu and Thought Machine and all of those exciting new core banking platforms that are out there that are doing really interesting things. Then there's banking as a service, which is people who provide APIs to bank-like experiences. So that would be companies in the US like Synapse. It would even be Stripe. It would be Rails Bank in Europe, even Solaris Bank to a certain degree. They do it all slightly differently, but with their APIs, not only do I get the software, I get the sort of regulation wrapped in it, and I can deploy it to market much faster. Foundry is neither of those things. Foundry is a financial services operating system. And to understand that, you've really got to tell the story of who we are and how we kind of got to where we are. So my CTO, Ewan Silver, was the architect who came up with the architecture that Starling and Monzo now uses, and had built Nutmeg, and he built sort of sports betting platforms. And he realized that essentially everybody's building the same thing, but they're building it from the different places. So often what you see is in financial services, people are starting at the software they've already got and replicating that in new technology. So Ewan had been involved in those companies, and then we'd built Metal for NatWest. We'd helped the guys at Mox in Standard Chartered. We were building the same thing time and time again, and we noticed that people were using the same software to solve the same problems. But if you think about it very, very simply, Dexter, I'd put it to you this way. Imagine there's now a world in which there's a fintech app for everything. There's an app for eKYC. There's an app for account data provision. There's an app for sort of payments. There's a really good API for everything in fintech. And what a lot of people are doing is plugging that either into their core banking system or into their banking as a service provider, which works. But in order to do that, you've got to plug that also up into your user experience. And then you've got to build a user experience that differentiates you. So you end up, no matter who you are, as a fintech, as a non-bank, sort of building the same thing time and time again. You are replicating it. You're building your own operating system to install an app. So why isn't there an operating system? And so that's what we built. And that I can go into the various pieces of Foundry, but I think it will probably help if I stand back and set out the principles of what it requires to launch any financial product to market. But that's essentially the metaphor, a financial services operating system, because there are lots of great B2B providers now of APIs, and there wasn't an elegant way of stitching those all together.
So it's been a kind of 3-year journey, I think, with Foundry to get you to this point. What was it that helped you kind of get this, this understanding and this distinction?
I honestly think two things happened. One, I mean, we were very fortunate early on to have a great partner in Norway's largest bank, DNB, who really aligned on the vision. But then the second thing that happened about sort of really in the midst of the pandemic was the whole embedded finance movement really kicked off. The whole banking as a service story really kicked off. And this is where you see non-banks wanting to embed finance in their experience. And we at 11FS just saw so much demand in our consulting business from non-banks to build financial products. And these non-banks, they don't necessarily want to deal with the heavy lifting of regulation. They really need somebody who deeply understands financial services. And core banking software isn't really what they need. That's not for them. It's almost too powerful. It's too capable. And there's all of these other providers they're having to string together. And financial services is often not core to their business. It's secondary to their business. It's something that's an addition to their business. So they want to focus on what they're good at and leave the finance to sort of somebody else. So seeing all of that, it was actually in conversations with prospects very early on for Foundry that were non-banks. It was the CTO of one of the world's largest companies turned around to us and said, "Oh my God, you've actually built an operating system here." And we're like, "Oh, okay, that's what we've built." And we didn't have, honestly, the marketing language for it at the time.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is if I stand back and look at what you need as a non-bank or a bank or a fintech to get a product to market, you need essentially 5 things. At the very bottom layer, and I'm holding out my hand in front of me, so if you're listening, hold out your hand in front of you if you want. Otherwise, people watching you might think you're weird. But
that's it. I've got to start doing Zoom video podcasts now, mate.
Oh yeah, you got to make this happen. So at the bottom layer, you've got the rails. So this is things like payments. It's regulated stores of value. It's where the money sits. This is the deep infrastructure stuff. You need access to that stuff. At the second layer up, you've got the capabilities. So this layer, this is all the stuff you need in order to get access to the rails. So that's stuff like eKYC, that's stuff like fraud prevention, anti-money laundering. And in this space, there's a load of good apps. There's a load of good fintech companies that can help you do that now. Then you need a financial product. So you need some way of creating loans and deposits and all of that kind of good stuff. And then there's 2 layers above that everybody forgets about. So the fourth layer up is actually the differentiator or the service or the intelligent service layer. What's going to be the thing that makes you stand out for your customer? Is it going to be that you're going to do invoicing inside of a banking app? Is it that you're going to automatically allow people to switch their utility bill? Is it that you are, in fact, an accounting package and you're going to provide capital in real time or cash flow solutions? Like, what's going to be your hook? What's going to be the thing that makes you stand out? And then lastly, you actually need to build the UX, the UI, the services, the journeys, the workflows, all of that kind of good stuff, whether that's in your user experience or somebody else's. Now, if you go look at the vendors you need to put together, at the providers you need to put together to make that happen, the odds are it's about 5, 6, 7 at least. And even if you work with a very comprehensive banking as a service provider, they might aggregate all the bottom 3 layers, but you still need to figure out how you're going to differentiate what your user experience is going to look like. There was nothing that ran alongside the whole stack across all of those 5 layers as we looked at the market that could answer what your user journeys and workflows should look like, how are you going to differentiate, what your products could be, and what your kind of capabilities and providers are, and how you're going to access the rails. Foundry is not a core banking system. It's not a banking as a service system. It is the thing that sits alongside that and all of your other providers to kind of orchestrate them and allow you to differentiate and allow you to manage your user journeys. And when people see that, they go, oh, okay, so it is somewhere else. So I believe we've created a category with the financial services operating system. There are things that historically resembled it. People sometimes say, oh, well, that looks a bit like business process modeling or workflow. And that's not wrong, but it's not right either. Yeah. And there are nerdy technical reasons for why.
Yeah. What really fascinates me is the kind of bringing everything together. And as you said, the operating system of financial services. What's been the reaction that you've had from customers when you've kind of now gone out and had this discussion with them? Has it been, oh, here we go again, another thing I've got to buy? Or has it been actually, wow, like this actually makes sense?
Everyone that's had a demo of it has been blown away. And we are now starting to see more inbound demand that we can reasonably manage. So we're scrambling to put up kind of more automation and build wait lists and things like that, which is great validation. And I think a lot of it comes down to 2 things. There is so much demand in the non-bank sector. And also, this is a problem I think we've struck a nerve with, you don't want to build an operating system to send an email. So that just makes no sense but for so many businesses. And yet it's still where the financial services industry is. Yes, there are great APIs for pieces of the puzzle. There's a great API for email. There's a great API for calendar, but there's no operating system that brings them together. And so that's really resonated, I think, with 2 main audiences. One, definitely the non-banks who want to embed finance, but 2, interestingly, the banks who have large corporates as their customers, because those large corporations are asking everybody in front of them, how do I embed finance? How do I improve my experience for my customers? How do I grow my revenue across multiple geographies? Think about, there's a reason that certain big tech companies have launched credit cards in the USA and not gone anywhere else. Because geographically, it's very, very easy to, well, not very easy, but it's quite a bit easier to execute one thing in one market at scale in the US at the moment. But if you want to be across the various Asia Pacific regions, imagine the amount of different regulations and vendors that you have to kind of kludge together yourself as a business and bank partnerships. Now, the tech solution doesn't solve all of that, but what it does is it gives you a consistent technology to overlay to all of those providers. And that's hugely compelling.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the interest in the customers, because we've seen that reflected in our client base this year as well, where about 50% of our customers are not fintech, they're not banks, they're tech platforms who are looking to move into this space and start to offer lending products or buy now, pay later products or whatever that might be. And rather than the traditional kind of partnership, they're looking at technology to, I guess, bypass that partnership.
That makes complete sense as well. Like if you look at the US market, is probably the most mature here. Marqeta's biggest customer is Square, but Square is increasingly going down the stack and starting to own more and more of it itself, and has done extremely well. But they're sort of a glorified fintech. But the other Marqeta customers and Galileo customers that you look at are companies like food delivery apps like DoorDash and Instacart for their driver cards. So you think about all of those food delivery companies and kind of ride-hailing companies. You think about all of the accounting platforms. You think about the big tech platforms themselves. Absolutely. In percentage terms, I would say it's 60 to 70% non-banks, about 20 to 30% fintechs, and then sort of it's a much smaller percentage, but very high impact. There's a few big global banks who really, really get it. For us, that's a longer conversation because they are big banks and they move slow. But when they move, they really move.
So what do you think this kind of spells for the big banks? Because when you start to think of the potential of DeFi as well, you wonder what is the role or the purpose that they're going to have in this next 5-10 years.
It's interesting, isn't it? I guess it depends where you sit in the bank. Because if you're sitting as the head of retail banking products, you might have a very different worldview to if your customers are some of the largest corporations in the world. If your customers are actually some of the largest corporates in the world in global transaction banking or global cash management divisions, then for a long time, that part of the bank has been really the engine room, has really been the star, consistent growth, consistent revenue, decent high margins. Like that's a good bit of most banks that nobody really talks about. And for those guys, embedded finance is like the next big thing. This is a way to sell more product, but their manufacture and distribution and their technology just doesn't work for it. So those guys have got, I think, a really interesting opportunity. I then look at the retail banks and say, why you and what makes you stand out? And of course, you've got to say brand, absolutely. But do you become more of an Intel Inside or a Powered by brand, or are you there as sort of the base? Is finance still a destination, or is it the fuel to get to the destination? And I think it really comes down to understanding your customers' jobs to be done and how they've evolved. And you do see that some have done that extremely well. We've looked at a number of banks around the world. You could point at Tinkoff, for instance. Okay, they're a relatively young bank, but also some of the biggest banks. As you're familiar with our 11FS Pulse platform. We benchmark user experiences from some of the biggest banks around the world, as well as fintechs. And there are some across Asia Pacific, especially as you get out into Singapore. The UOBs, the DBSs, even Standard Chartered, where you're like, they're really good experiences that would compete with any of the financial super apps, if not beat the likes of a Revolut. So it can be done. You can create that financial control center and be that sort of middle point, that financial advisor in the pocket for the retail customer. But you've got to get really, really good in order to do it. And so are you ready for that? Do you understand your customers' problems well enough? Do you understand their jobs to be done? Are you organized to execute at the pace of a Revolut? Because if you're not, they're going to come and eat your lunch.
That's a really nice segue into kind of the next part that I want to talk to you about, because you've moved into the chief product officer role. It's what's it been like to go from mainly doing engagements with clients to now really having to drive something for your own business?
Do you know, at the very start of 11FS, we were all doing bits of everything. And it kind of reminds me of that in that we'd grown the consulting business successfully to the point where we had infrastructure and people and all of that good stuff to kind of, it was a case of doing the job well rather than inventing the job. And it's quite nice to be working without walls. There isn't a person that does X or a person that does Y. I mean, we're fortunate to have a group, with a phenomenal chief legal officer and CFO who can do incredible things for us. So we are not starting from scratch exactly, but there are no walls. What's our new marketing collateral going to look like? What's our blah, blah, blah? So the 11FS machine is incredibly supportive, and yet there are no answers to the questions. There's still a lot of sort of white powder to run at, to use a snowboarding analogy. And that's really, really exciting. So I've really enjoyed it. But in a lot of ways, it looks quite similar, right? So we've still got all of the brand stuff, still heavily involved in kind of the media side of what we do. The 11FS megaphone has been hugely helpful to turning a spotlight onto Foundry. And then really, my job's quite similar. It's helping people inside the team and at our clients understand how they're going to solve the challenges or achieve their objectives, and starting to build a team out underneath that. So I thought it would be more, honestly, I looked at it, I thought it'd be more different than it is, and it's really very familiar. And but yet at the same time, exciting because there are so many unanswered questions and so many things to figure out. So I'm energized by it.
Awesome. So do you kind of see this now as being almost like a software business as added on now under the kind of stable of 11FS brands?
Yeah, so I think we always had a SaaS business in 11FS Pulse.
Yeah.
So we have some of that muscle memory in terms of how you run that and how you support enterprises and fintechs in that space. And so Foundry, I think, would borrow a lot of learnings from that, but also build its own path to a certain degree. But yeah, I mean, look, from the whole company's hugely excited by Foundry. It's definitely kind of in the middle of the meadow, as David puts it. But the rest of the company needs to exist in order for Foundry to make sense. You think about the problems that the market has, and you've talked to a lot of tech companies. A lot of it is just understanding how finance works. It's such a dense, confusing subject. So where are you going to go to understand how finance works? Well, hopefully 11FS and some of our media and Fintech Insider is a great starting point for people wanting to learn or stay relevant about financial services. Or you've got a specific problem with compliance, or you really need people who've had hand-on experience working from an engineering standpoint with the payments rails. Again, 11FS can help you there. So there's bits and pieces that the rest of the company has that is hugely, hugely beneficial. And I actually see the whole thing as a flywheel.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what to do or how to get started in financial services, then there's the media brand, there's Pulse, you can get inspired. If you don't know how to execute, then there's the services business, because we can come and help you figure out with you how you might solve for your customer, how you might solve that problem. And then when you want to execute it and you don't want vendor lock-in, you want that creativity, you want the ability to change, we've got the platform that can really help you accelerate your time to market, and also avoid vendor lock-in, bring consistency across geographies, and allow you to truly differentiate. And we don't think that exists anywhere else. And we've built a few things. So that's why I think the three come together. And then the hands-on experience of having built this platform goes back up into the media brand. We are practitioners. So what you hear on the podcast, what you see in the reports is from people doing this every day.
It's amazing, right? When I look back and I think, 4 years ago when I was first introduced to yourselves and have watched the journey, and it kind of everything that you've done flies in the face of conventional advice. And, I think advice that is actually the right advice for 99% of people in a startup, which is focus on one thing, execute it well, earn the right to diversify and expand. But you kind of had the diversified model from day one. And it's amazing to see how it's now kind of with the, as you mentioned, the megaphone of the media strategy, how it's now kind of really, really, really gaining a lot of momentum. And it's, you've been super successful over the first 5 years, but you wonder what the next 5 years is going to be like.
Yeah, I have no idea. And that's the most exciting thing. And I think as well, the first 5 years have really sort of established that the model can work and does work. And then now it's about sort of scaling the thing and executing on that, especially on the Foundry side of it. We're very fortunate to have a robust core of the platform, but a bunch of exciting new use cases pulling us in various directions. And that creativity side of it is honestly the most energizing part of the job. Is what problem we're going to bump in today from what type of customer. And that's, again, because we have those other parts of the business, we can really sort of bring something I don't think anybody else can, which is that combination of stuff. And it, honestly, the model has got its costs. It's hard sometimes. It's that we don't have the luxuries of having massive funding rounds coming in, but that's also really worked in our favor. We've had to be constrained. We've had to figure out how to do more with less and earn our way. And genuinely, that's probably what's helped us last the test of time. And it's made us anti-fragile, and it's made us continue to grow in the face of anything. And I hope that means we're building a robust thing for the long term that can really start to take off.
No, it's a culture that I think is really unique. I've had so many chats with David about it as well. And I'm a big believer in the kind of sports team philosophy. I think it's critical for businesses that are scaling. What would you say are the things that kind of keep you energized and keep you kind of enjoying? I'd say going to work, but nobody goes to work these days. But working with the group that is 11FS, and if there are people listening out there, who do you think are the kind of types of people that tend to really turn out to be highly successful in the business?
The one thing everybody says about 11FS is when you look to the left and the right, the talent here is incredible and the work is really good. And that's honestly the two things that energize me the most is the learning I get from the people inside the company. You've probably heard Kate Moody on our podcast. You've heard Guerra Kawana. We've got a generation of people coming through the company that just are so unbelievably talented. And you get so much learning from how they're thinking about customers or operations or different perspectives, different lived experience. That's hugely, hugely exciting. So that sort of learning from the people is huge. And then learning from the work. You don't tend to come to 11FS if you want just another blue one of those things that's existed for 30 years. You tend to come to 11FS if, oh my God, we can't solve it. We've got to go to 11FS. If so much of our work comes through either you've heard us through media or somebody referred you to us. And you got referred to us because we're the ones that can probably help you solve that really hard problem. That's energizing, I think, for anyone, which is, hey, we want to do this thing, but we want it to be different. We want it to stand out. Or, hey, we want to do this thing, but we don't know how to do it and we don't think it's been done. Can you help us get it done? And that's exciting. That really is energizing. But the third thing for me is, fintech itself. I know I'm a massive nerd for saying this. It's my actual hobby. I just think the company mission, changing the fabric of financial services, really means something to me. And it means something because if you want to build a school, you care about healthcare, you care about climate, you care about families, you care about whatever you care about, I can make an argument for how changing how money works changes that outcome. Because maybe you care about foreign direct investment and aid and charitable giving. Well, guess what? That's not very efficient and it uses the banking system and it has a bunch of KYC problems. How can we fix that?
Yeah.
Or you care about the carbon impact of our purchases and the economy around that. Well, let's look at how the benchmarks work. Can we bake that into your user experience? How can we do that more at the corporate level? Should we be working with Swift GPI? So that whatever it is, there's an interesting conversation to be had, and it has real world impact. So once you really look at the fabric of financial services, if you can figure out how the rails and the infrastructure works, I know this is going to sound like a Silicon Valley TV show reference. You can actually impact the world. You can actually change the world. And I find that so exciting. And so every time there's a bit of fintech news or something happening, I get a genuine buzz of excitement. And I'm not ashamed to say that. And I think there's a lot of folks at 11FS who find the same thing. Or they get their joy from creating a great user experience or solving a problem. And I think that's what attracts people to the company. And those are the people who do well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right, when you talk about that, and I hear this, and I've used this term myself about fintech being a force for good, and sometimes I cringe. But then I have guests on my show where they're genuinely making a massive impact on people's lives. And even buy now, pay later players, right? There are some people whose lives they've impacted in a really positive way. I'm like yourself, Simon. That's the stuff that really gets me up in the morning. It's the thing that gets me up to work. And then I look at my kids and I see how they interact with it and the experiences they have. And when I start to think of, the possibility of a metaverse and what that means for them, and it's just, how could you not get juiced up by that stuff? It's amazing.
Well, and thing to bear in mind is, especially for the younger generations, they've got a lower share of wealth than any generation before them.
Not my kids, mate. If you look at their Robux accounts.
Well, yeah. But as a generation, right? So, and then asset prices are only getting higher. So it's getting harder and harder to own your own stuff, your own car, your own house. So your generation rent at the best of times. Real incomes versus inflation. How well is that doing? And then also money is gamified. So in Roblox, in Fortnite, there's money, and there's money as culture is a really, really normal thing.
Yeah.
So there's a generation of people that really, really care about money in a way that I don't think was culturally as normal for millennials, for Gen X, and even for boomers.
Yeah.
And that's exciting in terms of what comes next. And we're seeing that creativity start to hit now.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's a really valid point. Actually, I would come from the generation where money was evil. Even if you look in the Wall Street, everything is the search for wealth was always considered to be the path to evil. So it's a really interesting point, that, Simon.
And I think that kind of world, every generation has it, that the world their kids live in is confusing, but we've got to be careful not to judge it. We've got to really understand the creativity that's coming out of this new exciting corners of the internet. I look at what's happening in the US around the infrastructure bill and everything happening with crypto, and there are two worldviews, which is, this is all evil, we've got to kill it. And then actually, this could be the best thing for innovation ever for financial services if we do it right. And the answer is probably somewhere in the middle of the two. But let's be sensible about it. Let's go with a hint of optimism, a ton of experience, and figure out, but how does this actually solve problems for people, and who are the problem solvers?
If people just went to governments and said, hey, you could have parametric tax, I'm sure they would very quickly embrace the technology.
Well, that's the interesting thing. You'd think, wouldn't you? But actually, a lot of the times, just getting that sold. There's this thing inside large incumbent organizations quite often, not everywhere. There are definite big exceptions to this rule but that's not credible because it seems too innovative. We've got to get on with the day job. The thing we have to focus on is just executing on what's in front of us. And that's not wrong because, my goodness, they've got big problems and they've got things they've got to deal with, and they've got to keep the lights on and they've got to keep everything working. But it misses so many opportunities to do things better. And what happens is those opportunities get taken elsewhere. They either get taken by innovators or the market, or they get taken by other countries, or whenever you leave opportunity on the table, somebody else is going to grab it. And that's something that I think a lot of incumbents have woken up to in financial services now. But it might be a case then of, okay, how do I change my DNA? How do I change how I fund things? How do I change how I execute? And it's a similar problem for governments in that they might want this stuff or at some level, but they're so used to big procurement contracts with big vendors that take many years, and if it doesn't cost 200 million, it's not credible. And that's a problem.
It is. Well, we're kind of coming to a wrap up, Simon, but before we do, what would you say other than Foundry has got you most excited in the fintech industry right now?
It's got to be the nexus of DeFi and fintech. I'm hugely excited by money as Lego bricks, genuine Lego bricks, permissionless Lego bricks. It's one thing to talk about modular finance. It's another thing to talk about composable, open, permissionless finance. So the metaphor I always use for this is, pick your two favorite fintechs. So if Afterpay builds a feature, there's no way that Square could use it unless they acquire them. If Afterpay builds a feature, there's no way that Klarna can use it. In DeFi, if one project builds something, another project can just consume it and use it. So what you get is Compound Finance builds a thing and Aave can use it. Uniswap builds a thing and Yield Yiffy can use it. Like, that's incredibly exciting, and that's going to unleash innovation. What we've done is we've built software primitives that are open and permissionless and free for finance. And we're only just getting started, and yet there's billions of dollars moving through this alternate financial system. Yeah. And then what you're seeing is, okay, that sounds great, but it's all for software developers. So how's that going to solve a customer problem? Well, now there's a whole bunch of fintechs and neobanks starting to add those features into their apps. So this is starting to become mainstream, whether it's services like BlockFi that give people access to it that feels more crypto, or the challenger bank in the US called Current.com. They've added just a very simple savings feature where you can save upwards of 4 or 5%. And that just sounds like a great savings rate. But behind the scenes, that's using DeFi and that's using crypto. So where does the best of fintech meet DeFi is going to be hugely exciting. And I will say, 11FS is doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes for crypto businesses, natively digital businesses. And that's where we see a lot of opportunity to build the future.
Fantastic. And what can we expect from Foundry in this next 12 months? Any exciting news to share?
In the next, none that I'm allowed to share, but yes.
Can't give us a tip, just teaser.
A flavor, I think we got some big partnerships and some big customer announcements in the works that are going to get super interesting. So look out for that. And there may even be something in your neck of the woods as well. So let's see.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Can't wait. Well, Simon, it's been great to chat. I can't believe I've left it a year. I'll try not to next time. Thanks so much for joining me. Where can people
You're very welcome.
Where can people find out more about Foundry and yourself?
Yeah, you can find me at SY Taylor on Twitter. All the 11FS stuff is 11fs.com and 11fs.com/Foundry if you want to take a look at the platform, request a demo, come get involved. Come have a look at what a financial services operating system might be and how it might solve your hardest problem.
And you can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. For early access to new shows and updates on the latest exclusive opportunities through Tier 1 People, subscribe to our newsletter by visiting the Fintech Chatter page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, remember to press follow on your favorite podcast player and please consider leaving us a review. It really does help me in bringing in great guests and help fintech fans like you discover the show. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can find out more at tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe